April 1943. Somewhere over the South Pacific, the war is no longer abstract. It is personal. The man who planned Pearl Harbor is in the air. If he lands, he keeps commanding the empire that set the Pacific on fire. If he dies, Japan loses one of its sharpest minds. America has one chance to reach him, across hundreds of miles of ocean, at wave-top height, through enemy airspace, with no margin for error. And the aircraft chosen for that mission is the one many people had never fully trusted in the first place. A strange, twin-boomed machine that looked less like a fighter and more like an engineering argument that somehow escaped the drafting table. Too weird, too complex, too unconventional. That was the verdict. But war has a way of humiliating first impressions, because this mistake would become one of the most lethal American aircraft of World War II. And before the war was over, the plane that looked wrong to everyone on the ground would look absolutely terrifying to anyone unlucky enough to see it in the sky. At the worst moments of war, nations don't ask for elegance. They ask for reach. They ask for violence. They ask for something that can get there in time. And in the Pacific, there meant almost anywhere. That was the tyranny of that theater. Not just the enemy. Distance. Endless water. Tiny islands scattered like fragments of stone across a blue emptiness so vast it seemed to erase human plans on contact. In Europe, fighters could cross coastlines, return to bases, and fight over land that looked connected. In the Pacific, being brave was not enough. You had to survive geography. America desperately needed a fighter that could fly farther, hit harder, and still come home. What it got looked insane. The P-38 Lightning did not resemble the romantic image of a fighter. No sleek single fuselage, no tidy silhouette, no graceful simplicity. Instead, Lockheed gave the Army Air Corps a machine with two long tail booms, a pilot, sitting in a central nacelle, engines spread apart like clenched fists, and a shape that looked so unusual it seemed almost experimental, even after it entered service. To traditional eyes, it looked wrong, like someone had taken a fighter apart and rebuilt it from memory, like a compromise too strange to trust in combat, like a machine designed by engineers who cared more about equations than instinct. And in a way, that was exactly what it was. The story begins in the late 1930s, when the United States Army Air Corps asked for something brutally ambitious. A high-speed, high-altitude interceptor that could outperform anything then in the sky. Most designers, when confronted with such demands, begin trimming expectations. Lockheed's designers, led by Hall Hibbard with the brilliant young Clarence Kelly Johnson playing a central role, went the other way. They asked what would happen if they stopped trying to make the aircraft look conventional and started building. Exactly what the mission required. The answer was radical. Two engines for speed, range, and redundancy. Turbo superchargers for high-altitude performance. A central cockpit nacelle for visibility and concentration of mass. Twin booms to carry the tail while leaving room for the engines and supercharger system. And perhaps most importantly, all the main guns mounted in the nose. That last choice was devastatingly important. Most fighters of the era carried guns in the wings, which meant their fire had to converge at a chosen distance. But the P-38's battery, 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon clustered in the nose, fired straight ahead in one concentrated stream. No convergence problem, no scattering pattern from widely spaced wings. Wherever the pilot pointed the nose, the full punch arrived together. It was the sort of design that made perfect sense to engineers and uneasy sense to everybody else. Then it flew, and suddenly the freak started, producing numbers nobody could ignore. The Lightning was astonishingly fast for its era, one of the first American fighters to exceed 400 miles per hour. It climbed hard. It carried heavy firepower. It had range that set it apart from almost every contemporary fighter. On paper, it looked revolutionary. But war does not begin on paper. It begins when frightened young men are told to trust their lives to something nobody fully understands yet. And the P-38, for all its brilliance, asked for trust early. It was not an easy airplane in the way simple airplanes are easy. It was large for a fighter. It was different in feel. It had systems that demanded careful maintenance. Its high-speed dive characteristics created one of the most dangerous aerodynamic problems of the war: compressibility. In certain dives, especially before fixes and dive recovery flaps improved the situation, the aircraft could become terrifyingly hard to pull out. In Europe, its engines and systems also suffered. In bitter cold conditions, at altitude, and the airplane earned a mixed reputation with some units there. To critics, this was confirmation. They had said the Lightning was too complicated, too temperamental, too strange. And for a while, it seemed they might be right. That is what makes the P-38 story so powerful. It did not become legendary because it entered the war adored. It became legendary because it had to fight through doubt before it ever fought through the enemy. Pilots respected it, feared it, cursed it, learned it. And once they truly understood what it could do, the whole character of the airplane changed. Because if the Lightning was demanding, it also gave back in terrifying amounts. It was fast enough to dictate terms. It had the altitude performance to hunt. It had twin engines, which meant it could sometimes bring a pilot home when a single-engine fighter would have dropped him into the ocean. It had range that turned impossible maps into possible missions. And, when its nose battery fired, it hit with the force of a hammer swung by a machine. In Europe, the P-38 had moments of brilliance, but also real frustrations. In the Pacific, it became something else entirely. In the Pacific, it became a predator. That theater suited the Lightning in ways that almost felt destined. The vast distances played directly into its greatest strength: range. The long overwater missions rewarded endurance and twin-engine security. The need to strike deep, escort farther, and appear where enemy planners thought American fighters could not possibly reach. That was Lightning territory. And once it got into the hands of the right men, it stopped looking like a strange aircraft and started looking like the future. No story captures that transformation better than Operation Vengeance. In April 1943, American codebreakers intercepted one of the most valuable pieces of intelligence of the war: the travel schedule of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of Japan's combined fleet and the architect of Pearl Harbor. The opportunity was extraordinary, but there was a brutal catch. Yamamoto's route was far from American bases. The interception would require a fighter that could fly an immense low-level mission, hit on time with precision, and still make it back. Only one aircraft in the American inventory truly fit that profile: the P-38. On April 18, 1943, a formation of Lightnings launched on one of the most daring fighter missions of the war. They flew at extremely low altitude for hundreds of miles across open ocean to avoid detection. Timing had to be exact. Navigation had to be exact. Fuel management had to be exact. Everything had to go right. And when the P-38s arrived, they found Yamamoto's aircraft. The interception was swift, violent, and historic. Yamamoto was killed. Beyond the tactical success, the mission announced something larger about the Lightning. This was not merely a fast fighter. It was a strategic instrument, a machine capable of changing history because it could reach farther than conventional expectations. That is when the weird airplane started becoming a legend. But machines do not build legends alone. Men do. And no man is more inseparable from the P-38 than Richard Bong. Bong was a quiet young pilot from Wisconsin who seemed born to fight in 3 dimensions. In the Southwest Pacific, flying the Lightning, he became America's highest-scoring ace of the war with 40 aerial victories. 40. In any era, that would be staggering. In the Pacific, against skilled opponents across huge distances, and in a machine many had once thought too odd to define fighter warfare, it became immortal. Bong and the P-38 fit each other. He knew how to exploit its strengths: speed, altitude, fire concentration, and the ability to hit hard before breaking away. He did not need the Lightning to dance like a lightweight turn fighter. He needed it to kill. And when he got behind an enemy aircraft and centered that nose battery, the result was often immediate and final. Then there was Thomas Maguire, America's second highest scoring ace, also in the P-38, with 38 victories. Different personality, same deadly result. The Lightning produced not just one American Titan, but two of the greatest fighter pilots the country ever sent into war. That alone tells you something profound about the aircraft. Great pilots can make many machines look good, but when the top two American aces of the war are both tied emotionally and operationally to the same fighter, you are no longer talking about an accident. You are talking about a weapon with a very specific genius. And that genius was not beauty. It was asymmetry. The P-38 did not win affection by being familiar. It won by being unlike anything else. Its twin Allison engines gave it speed and confidence over water. Its concentrated nose armament meant it could destroy bombers and fighters with a shocking burst of accurate fire. Its long range turned remote enemy territory into reachable ground. Its stability as a gun platform made it exceptionally dangerous in the hands of disciplined pilots. It could escort, intercept, strafe, reconnoiter, and punish. Even its reconnaissance variant, the unarmed F-5, became one of the most valuable photo reconnaissance aircraft of the war, gathering enormous amounts of intelligence. This is where the title becomes true in the deepest way. The P-38 looked like a mistake because people mistook unfamiliarity for failure. They saw the twin booms and assumed compromise. They saw complexity and assumed fragility. They saw something that did not resemble the classic fighter silhouette and assumed it could never become iconic. But combat has a brutal meritocracy. It strips away aesthetics. It does not care how pretty you look on the runway. It cares whether you can climb, fire, endure, navigate, surprise, and return. The Lightning could do all of it. Even so, legend was not simple, and that matters, because the P-38 was not a magic machine. It had real flaws, real maintenance burdens, real dangers, real theater-specific problems. In Europe, some pilots found the aircraft's cold-weather engine issues and dive behavior deeply frustrating. It did not dominate there in the same mythic way it did in the Pacific. That mixed record is part of why its rise feels so dramatic. The Lightning had to earn its place differently depending on where it fought. And yet, even that complexity added to its aura. It was not beloved because it was easy. It was feared because, once mastered, it was devastating. German pilots gave it one of the war's great enemy nicknames, the Fork-tailed Devil. The name stuck because it fit. The P-38 did not arrive like a graceful duelist. It arrived like a problem you noticed too late. That shape, those twin booms, that center cockpit, that predatory outline, became one of the most recognizable silhouettes in, for me, aviation history, not because it was conventional, but because it was unforgettable. The same design people once treated as awkward became its own form of psychological warfare. One glance and you knew what was coming. And then there is the emotional truth buried beneath all the performance numbers. For pilots flying over the Pacific, the P-38 was more than speed and cannon shells. It was reassurance. Over endless water, twin engines meant hope. If one engine was lost, the other might still carry you home. In a theater where down often meant ocean, shark-filled isolation, capture, or disappearance without a grave, that mattered beyond statistics. A single extra chance at survival can transform how a pilot feels climbing into a cockpit before dawn. That emotional bond is easy to miss when history becomes a list of specifications, but it is there. The Lightning looked dangerous on paper. To the men inside it, once they learned it, it could feel like insurance against the Pacific itself. And as the war went on, the impossible-looking aircraft kept proving its worth in role after role. It escorted bombers across vast distances. It hunted enemy aircraft over New Guinea and the Philippines. It strafed shipping and ground targets. It brought back reconnaissance photographs that shaped campaigns. It remained relevant because its unusual design had given it unusual flexibility. That is, the hidden power of radical engineering when it works. A conventional machine may satisfy expectations. An unconventional one, if it succeeds, can redraw them. By the war's later years, newer fighters like the P-51 Mustang would capture much of the public imagination. The Mustang was elegant, streamlined, and perfect for the mythology of the long escort war over Europe. It fit the image of the heroic fighter more naturally. The P-38 never fit that image so comfortably. It remained slightly alien, slightly mechanical, slightly severe, which is exactly why its legacy feels so enduring. Because the Lightning never needed to be loved at first sight. It only needed to be remembered after contact. And nobody who fought it forgot it. Not the Japanese crews who discovered American fighters could now reach where they had once felt safe. Not the bombers that suddenly had an escort farther out than before. Not the men who watched a P-38 tear through enemy aircraft with one brutal nose-mounted burst. Not the pilots who came home because one engine kept turning. Not the generation that learned an airplane could look completely wrong and still be exactly right for the war. In the end, the P-38 Lightning became one of the defining paradoxes of World War II aviation. A fighter that looked experimental but shaped real campaigns. A machine criticized for complexity that became indispensable through capability. An aircraft with flaws serious enough to scare pilots, yet strengths overwhelming enough to make aces out of the men who mastered it. It did not become legendary by winning a beauty contest. It became legendary by solving problems no ordinary fighter could solve. That is why the Lightning still feels modern in spirit. It represents something bigger than air combat. It represents the moment when imagination outruns familiarity. When engineers stop asking what a great fighter is supposed to look like and start asking what it must actually do. When war punishes every lazy assumption and rewards the design bold enough to be strange. The P-38 was strange. Strange enough to be doubted. Strange enough to be mocked. Strange enough to look, at first glance, like someone had built the wrong airplane on purpose. And then history happened. Pearl Harbor burned. The Pacific widened. Targets lay beyond normal reach. America needed a hunter, not a decoration. And the aircraft that had looked like a mistake rose into that gigantic sky and started performing like a monster. That is why the Lightning endures. Because every generation is tempted to laugh at what looks unfamiliar. Every generation mistakes elegance for superiority and oddness for weakness. But history is full of machines and people who make their first impression badly and their final impression forever. The P-38 was one of them. A fork-tailed contradiction, a mathematical gamble, a strange silhouette over an endless ocean. Proof that sometimes the thing that looks wrong to the world is the very thing the moment was waiting for. And in war, as in life, the future often arrives wearing a shape nobody recognizes until it is already too late to stop it.